Welcome to Resilience Radio, Building Wellness in Vermont and Beyond. I'm your host, Irvin Eisenberg, board-certified structural integrator and occupational therapist. Today, I'll be talking with certified clinical somatic practitioner, a certified functional yoga therapist, and who specializes in pregnancy, birth, and postpartum work, and that is Amy LePage. Great to have you on today, Amy.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
So you've taken various somatic classes, and I'm sure I did not cover all of them. Could you highlight what trainings and philosophies are most influential to your work?
Yeah, sure. Well, my training started with Hatha Yoga, and pretty quickly I was drawn into the anatomy piece. I've always been excited about anatomy ever since high school, so it just really piqued my interest. And right away, I started to study through functional synergy and start to go down that path of the yoga therapy training that they offer, which really does have a strong focus in functional movement and how the functional movement of the body, what's needed to move into yoga poses. So that's kind of how that started. And then from there, it really shifted into working with people with pain, injury, things like that, but also just people who are really curious about their bodies. So kind of getting in through that lens of yoga and then exploring from there in deeper ways and working, on people building the skill to start to understand their bodies better, how they're moving, how they function, and how to help themselves. And the clinical somatic training that I've done is something that I was drawn to after having a number of years of working with the yoga therapy. And the somatic work is based on Thomas Hanna's work. And it really felt like this deeper level of getting into working with the body in terms of reflex patterns and holding patterns and how and why we hold muscular tension. So that training really was one that just kind of, I feel like it just opened the door so much bigger on what I already had with the therapeutic yoga. So those are my two main movement focuses in terms of that.
Could you define what somatic work is? And
yeah,
I guess more generally and for your own path.
Yeah. Well, the somatic kind of is like an umbrella word, and there's a number of different modalities that can fall under that. And so yoga could fall under that, Feldenkrais, Alexander technique. And the approach that I have studied is the Thomas Hanna's approach to somatic movement. And his approach has kind of come from Feldenkrais, and then it's really focusing on neuromuscular retraining. So starting to understand how to work with movements to start to release chronic tension holding patterns in the muscular system, and then how that in turn impacts the skeletal system and movement and breathing. And so the focus is really on slowing down, and through slower movement, really detailed, full of attention with how you're moving, that then you actually are accessing a different part of your brain and how that works with the sensory and motor neurons in the body. And a huge piece of that with both of those pieces for my background is helping people build awareness to understand what's actually going on in their body, but also to understand and to be able to kind of notice the feel of moving in their body. So that they can actually start to recognize, well, what is tension? What is strain? What is feeling easeful? All of those.
Mm-hmm. So you've touched on the yoga piece and the somatic piece, which they certainly overlap and are part of the same thing. Could you speak a little bit to your specialty in pregnancy, prenatal, and postpartum work, and how that plays in with the rest of your work?
Yeah. So I definitely have, I've always thought of it as having kind of two focuses with my work, but that they also meld and blend together. So the yoga therapy and the somatic work is with anyone and everyone, you know. And then for those folks who are on that pregnancy, birthing, parenting journey, I weave in the trainings and backgrounds I have with specifically with prenatal yoga and doula trainings. And currently right now I'm doing another training on the physiological baby care, and it's just fascinating. So, you know, I really bring my somatic work and my skill set in yoga therapy into the work I do with people who are in that process of pregnancy, birthing, or postpartum. And through childbirth education, prenatal yoga, postnatal yoga, and also just individual sessions really focused on birther and their support person or people, helping them to understand the physiology of what's happening at these different stages and how to support their own self and each other, and how to also, it's not like about connecting with their baby, but also understanding ways that they can take care of themselves while they take care of their babe, and then also to better understand cues that are happening and just the connection that's there, and how to kind of foster those connections throughout those processes too.
Okay, so it sounds like you have a very deep and broad understanding of the somatic work. Could you lay out like what does your practice look like? What are your different offerings? And
Sure, yeah. So
I guess you could even say during COVID and in general, because they may be very different.
I know. In general, definitely group classes and workshops and series focus classes for the somatic movement and the therapeutic yoga. And then also for the pre and postnatal work would be, you know, offering a variety. So group classes for folks who feel like they can get there on that weekly basis, and workshops to kind of delve into a topic, right, a little bit deeper, that usually are sometimes a little easier for people to be like, okay, I could do like a 2.5 hour thing. And then also series work for when people can delve in a little bit more. And with the childbirth education, like how that is offered is usually longer periods of time, 3-hour sessions or a 1-day session to work with people's very full schedules typically. And also working individually with people. I have an office in town in Montpelier, and seeing people privately that way normally, right? So things are definitely different now. So currently with COVID, where everything's online, do it through Zoom, doing group classes and workshops and individual sessions. And it is working. It's totally working. And it's actually kind of sometimes surprising how well it works, right? So there's obviously missing being in person with people. But I found that it's a way of connecting when people really need the connection and they need that time for themselves. And it's also been this interesting way of like, people can come from beyond central Vermont because of the access via Zoom. So there's this weird like push-pull with the Zoom kind of thing, but it's what's happening right now. And I am seeing individual clients in person as they are comfortable with it. And, you know, I have an office space where we're keeping up with lots of protocols and creating a very safe space for that. But currently it is more online. So it's something that the individual sessions is in person. It's definitely different now. Yeah. With COVID.
So I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but how do you find your way to the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
What's your origin story, so to speak?
Well, I think for me, I've always been a kinetic learner, and I've always been interested in the anatomy, the physiology. So kinetic learning, but also expressing through dance and improvisation. So I do feel like that definitely influences how I teach and how I work with people. And the comfort level I have around not needing to have a template and like doing the same thing for everybody, and then that should work, and really making it individualized. So being comfortable with that improvisation, I think, does feed and fuel my interest, and also how I go about my work. And I remember when my kids were really little, like babies, 2 little babies, and I really needed something for me at that stage. And so I started to do some trade work cleaning a yoga studio in exchange for taking classes. And when I had a chance to go and take classes, that was a space where I felt fueled and calm and fed. So there was a lot of self-care that happened in those classes. And I think that started to kind of spark this, I feel like I need to spend more time doing this. And then also, how could going toward this, this focus, like how could that help other people who need that as well? And so it kind of started with, as soon as I did the yoga training, while there was that kind of quick shift into the anatomy focused part, there was also a shift that happened with prenatal and postnatal yoga, which honestly, I sort of felt like I was doing this to not be focused on that part of me because I needed kind of, I needed a break from that, but I needed, some shift from that, and not solely being focused on the raising of the kids and being there 24/7 with them, and what that just demands.
So let me make sure I have the timeline right, because I think I got a little bit confused by the timeline. So you had already been doing a lot of improvisational movement, and then you found your way to yoga during stressful parenting years, early parenting years.
Early years. Yeah.
Yes. And then it sort of came around to doing sort of pre and postnatal work. And that piece, as you're saying, I can see how that would be potentially causing more stress or allowing you to process what the experiences that you're having. Where did that start in your timeline?
Yeah, well, I feel like it really kind of coincided with, as soon as I started taking more, doing more studies, learning more, and going down that path of yoga, that it also pretty quickly had that that connection to the prenatal, postnatal world. And so it was surprising, and at the same time really healing. Yeah, and I think it was a way for me to be able to offer what I had wanted for myself, that I didn't know I needed, but that would have been really, really helpful. Yeah.
So with that in mind, you've mentioned that you wish there were more education in schools for children about bodies awareness and such, starting as early as preschool. And I'm curious what that would look like in your ideal education setting.
Yeah, well, gosh, in an ideal education setting, I feel like it would look like, I guess to start with, in, if you think physical education, a class, it's something that every kiddo, this, I guess I'm speaking in terms of public school, like every kiddo takes that class. So to me, that seems like a really great place to start to just bring in some real basics about understanding how the body works. And then because it's a movement-based class, then that can actually be translated right away into kinetic learning. And so I think for kids at a young age to be able to understand how to pay attention to how movement feels, to be able to pay attention to, am I breathing? Am I not breathing? And to just have a chance to understand that, their body isn't a mystery, and that if they can start to learn some basics about that, and then, as they get older, that can kind of grow and expand. And it definitely requires support from schools to educate the educators, or to be able to have the funding to bring people in who can, develop simple little like exercises or things like that that can be offered during the school day in a classroom environment, less sitting at desks all the time, and more moving and all of that, getting outside as much as possible, I think would be great. Yeah, and it's really interesting, I think, with COVID right now too, to be able to think about, well, what kind of things can happen. Maybe there's opportunity for shifts. With people who've been outside more, and not now with the winter happening at most places here, but yeah. So I feel like it would be small, simple ways of bringing in little opportunities for connecting with the body, and really also talking about stress, I think, and anxiety, and how that is like a huge issue in our young youth today. And all the screen use is huge. So things, knowing that that's not going away, how do we provide them with some skills and some body awareness to know how to cope with it?
So sort of coping skills along with the physical education and self-awareness. Yeah, I'm just thinking back to sort of what the culture of childhood, of children's gym classes, and it being the amount of guards that children have up and the amount of social posturing and such, that to be able to be physically and emotionally aware of your body in that setting is a vulnerability that I could see a lot of children not feeling safe doing.
Yeah.
And it seems like, I don't know, sort of a chicken or egg where that rub would be to get that sort of more honest exploration when you've got that much potential judgments and guards up. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I feel like it would have to be through play, right? Like, so there's things like brain gym, and there's I'm totally forgetting on the other one what it is called, that involves balls and using balls and bouncing. So it's definitely not like how I would ever teach a class to adults like that. I'm not picturing that at all. It's definitely through this lens of play and, small little ways that it's not even like a focus on them as an individual having to, talk about necessarily or all those things. But I could picture, in a setting, something where it's just simply as like, hey, let's run back across the gym or outside, and then just pause. What's your breath feel like? Are you breathing heavy? Or you're not breathing heavy? Like, how do your legs feel? Do you feel tingliness in your muscles? That's your muscles actually working. And so when you run like that, and then just have a brief little thing of like, did you know that your air is coming in through your body, through your lungs, and it turns to a chemical, and it somehow gets to all your muscles and your brain and your organs. So it's almost like throwing in little tidbits and facts in a fun way, because it's got to be fun. And yeah, those are just some quick thoughts off the top of my head.
No, that's great. It reminds me of, I've got this fantasy of doing a movement class. I'm probably post-COVID doing, and the working title for the class is Adults at Play.
Yeah.
And it would be, and it would right now, the basic concept would be starting off with some really functional warm-ups, making sure all the joints are warmed up, and then going into play activities. And it would be one I just came up with playing with my 2-year-old the other day. He wanted to play around with the idea of being a mermaid, and I was like, okay. And he's now requesting I tie his knees together and such, which is a bit bizarre, tying a belt around your child's knees. But I started playing around with, well, what kind of dance movements can you do, dancer, otherwise, if your knees are stuck together? So I was doing all sorts of movements with him. We were playing around being mermaids together, and that was
exactly.
Yeah. And I was just thinking the different fun dance-like activities of just keeping it playful. And I feel like there's a lot of a lot of movement classes, yoga and martial arts can have a very serious element to them that's understandable and important for, I mean, these are adult classes and such, but to be able to have that joyful exploration of one's own body is what I would be going for. And as an OT, play is an occupation. It is a important part of our daily activities. There's debate as to whether or not adults play within the OT world, but I certainly stand on the yes, they should have spontaneous, fun activity without necessarily all the ideas of skill gaining built into it. So in any case.
And I feel like it's like experiential, like something to be experiential so that they would have a chance at a young age to notice those things so that they can learn some skills for when they feel vulnerable and anxious in group settings, in a PE class or in some other class or in an interaction with a peer, so that they have the ability to notice, oh, my heart's like, oh, okay, like something feels different. I might not be able to know what it is, but I learned that thing where I can like, do that, or like do one kind of breath, or I can count to 10, or, so they gain those coping skills. And if they're used to it at a younger age, might it then not seem so weird and awkward as a teenager or as an adult?
So would you say most of your work with the somatic work is working with adults?
At this point it is, yeah. I feel like, I did for a little while teach in the public school setting out in California for about 5 years before coming to Vermont. And I taught like photography and some studio art classes. And I feel like I was really clear after that I wanted to, and then when I got here, I worked a little bit with pottery and teaching some pottery classes, and that was all kid-based. And I feel like I was then clear that I wanted to work with adults. And so that's where I feel like I'm at now. And I definitely see this need for working with younger folks. I'm not ready to do that right now personally, but yeah.
So you work on the adult end, and you're working in the early years, and the prenatal time as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any? I think you started to talk about the trainings that you're doing on some of the caring for the newborn and such. And are there any little tidbits that are exciting you about that you care to share?
Yeah, and really, it's so much of it is looking at it's caring for, it's about the kiddo and all of that, and it's also about this dyad of birther and babe, and what is happening in that connection. And the focus of that that training and that work is on really looking at the physiology. What is happening in this newborn body? Right, that's different than an adult body. And there was a lot of focus in there talking about cues and recognizing cues for when they're hungry or when they need to go to the bathroom and all of that. And also just understanding the different in their sleep cycles and why and what's happening for them. So I definitely feel like it's going to inform how I teach my childbirth education classes. And I really feel like I have always tried to bring in self-care, and how important it is. And it is so hard for people to do once their babies arrive. It's just like almost seems impossible. And I really have always felt how important it is, but especially after this, I'm like, yep, really important. And like, I need to up my game on how I share that in ways that it could feel more doable for people. And it's got to involve other people. I think that's the challenge right now with COVID, is like how much of a support system is really needed in postpartum, and how do you right now get what you need when it's so limited?
Yeah, child is such a, there's the cliche statement of it takes a community to raise a child, and and we only have the virtual community in a lot of cases right now. And the supports that people should be getting during
yeah.
during that time are harder to get. The flip side is having talked to people who wouldn't have been home with their child had it not been for COVID. Like, it was such an interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like there's the hard, super challenging parts of it, and there's also the parts that you wouldn't have had if things were normal, right? And having that time, kind of for that fourth trimester, like that time where newborn is at home, so much development happens during that time and connection. So I know, it's interesting.
So when you're looking at that time and sort of infant physiology, how has that deepened your awareness of your own body now?
Well, I mean, I guess in all honesty, hearing things a different way, maybe learning something new, or then you hear things and then think of, well, how did I raise my kids? And, maybe what happened during my infancy or my birth. And it is making me kind of like open the lens a little bit and kind of take in like, okay, this is really deep. Like there's a lot of experience, I feel like, that can happen that stays with us, and then the need to be able to process and be with and work through, and also the ability to be able to, not give yourself a hard time for doing what you tried your best at, and I think also knowing that there's this, we talked a lot about repair or I'm blanking on the word. Basically that there's often times that we need to repair things, because even in our best intention, we're doing something where, somebody got hurt by something we said, or we couldn't actually physically be there for something. And so there's damage and repair that happens. And knowing that we can always repair. So I can always work on something with my kids, right? Or remembering an instance where I could have said something different or been there in a different way. And I think it's helped me not give myself such a hard time too, when I think back on some of those things. And just like when I think about how do I have a healthy body, right? Like there's going to be our daily use patterns that are not ideal. And we could keep doing those things all the time and keep kind of getting constricted and tighter and like move less and get more stiff. Because the way we have to do things isn't really going to change unless we change how we're doing it, right? And we decide to actually take a class once a week that's good for us, or we decide to get up from our computer on a regular interval and walk around, or we actually do the standing computer thing, or we remember to drink more water and take some moments to breathe and get outside, right? So I think there's that repair of ourself, and then there's also the repair of how we connect with others.
So for an adult taking somatic classes with you, in what ways do you feel like your prenatal and postnatal infancy training informs your ability to help them with their current movement patterns?
Well, I think there's this innate wisdom that babies have and that we have to kind of learn to see and kind of tune into. And I think that then relates to, we have innate wisdom in our own bodies as well as adults. So as humans, whatever age, we can kind of get quiet and we can tune in. And when I think of babies and their developmental movements and what's happening in terms of their brain development and the fact that their brain is developing through their movement is building their brain. Like, we as adults have the ability to shift things based on how we move, based on the ability that we have to tune into kind of call it with a somatic movement background is getting cortical, which again is that one thing at a time, slow, paying attention to the detail of it, meaning that we can get into that prefrontal cortex and we can start to do something as if it's the first time we did it. And that retraining is kind of like when you see a little baby kind of trying to figure out, how do I do this and grab that thing? It's really similar when we ask an adult to figure out how to do a movement pattern in a slightly different way. So I guess that's one way that I could see answering that question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually just with a client earlier today, and we were playing around with the idea of he wanted to be able to squat better. That was one of his goals. And I was, aside from the idea of me saying, well, why? And why is there this gold standard of this squat you're looking for? And what function are you actually looking for? Making sure that our goal was actually, that the squat was actually the goal he was looking for. But additionally, we started playing around with, okay, so instead of it being this linear approach, just go into your squat and hold it and let's improve your range of motion. How do we back off that squat a little bit and then do some more organic movement, opening up his sacrum and such, when it's not as loaded as much, and then go back into the squat and see if you can do it more. And we were playing around with that, and we ended up talking about some of the sort of early childhood movement patterns and crawl patterns, the what I like to refer to as the walk of the bear and the walk of the cat, the whether your arm is swinging on with the same leg forward and such, and playing around with those movement things. So yeah, I enjoy in my more limited, I would say, I don't do as much movement work directly as part of my structural practice, but bringing those things in and thinking back to, well, if this is the way we did learn it or could have learned it, then maybe that's the way we can learn it now.
Yeah.
It's something that I've been thinking about particularly today, actually. So
yeah, hearing you ask that question of me and then you responding made me also think about this idea of almost relearning how to take care. You know, it's like typically if somebody feels tight somewhere, they just like stretch and pull and try to like stretch that thing out, you know? And so it's this idea of force. And I feel like it's no pain, no gain, like all those ways that it's typical that thing, exercise or whatever is thought about in the body. And, you know, my classes are the total opposite. It's all about less is more, and small is so powerful, and the ability of opening up to this idea of softness, and that there's strength and softness as well, and not to just force our way through movement or force our way through our day. You know, and even that with the childbirth prep, it's like, how do we in that moment learn how to release and let go, right? So yeah, there's a lot of, I think, educating around like a different way of being with ourselves and what's kind of culturally and societally like placed on us as the way to do things.
Well, I've experienced firsthand your some of your childbirth prep work. I haven't actually been in your adult somatic classes. I'm imagining that you're. I think some people might take what you said as sort of finding a more subtle way around as not being, is sort of backing off more than I'm imagining you do. I'm imagining you're right there with the sensation and exploring it, but trying not to be hard in doing it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like the least amount of effort you can put into being so totally aware and present, more so than you ever have been before with your body moving.
And it's a subtlety that's harder to do.
Oh yeah.
But I know I personally have trouble like meditating, being like entirely still and trying to clear things and meditating in the more traditional sense. But if it's a movement meditation, I can latch onto it. So I can see some people who are the likes of me being like, oh, well, that's a little bit too passive of a movement practice if it was just meditation. But it sounds like this is a lot more physically and mentally involved, and probably more so than if you were just pushing through no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
philosophy.
Yeah. It's involved in a very different way. And it is so not for everyone. That is so true, right? It's like, I remember working, this was kind of years ago, but I was working with a client, and, she was saying how she was a dancer, well, is a dancer. And she was saying how, I don't think I would have been ready for this work a few years ago, but I am now, and I can totally see and feel the value of it. But she's like, I wouldn't have been ready before. Right. So everybody's going to be on their different place with what they're ready for. And I think it is hard when you're asked to slow down and pay attention, right? Because everything is so like that. And I think over the years, a body can learn how to disassociate from feeling what's happening. And so really depending upon where a person's at, like that's why it's so different in a group class setting. Like some people can just drop right in and notice and feel so much. And then for others, it's literally like, I have people in class and I can't see on an audio, but I have them use a hand and just touch the part of the body we're going to actually move in a second, but like actually touch that part of your body. So if we're going to work with, as an example, your feet, I might be like, all right, let's touch your feet, let's feel your bones, feel the muscles. Now move your foot while you're touching it, and talking about how, by you touching, your sensory neurons are firing now. Okay, now you're moving and you're looking at it. So you've got this sensory motor thing happening more so now than it was before. And then doing movement, maybe where their hands aren't touching it. And for some people, they wouldn't need that sensory feedback right away, but it's a way to drop in differently. Yeah, for some people.
And do you do any hands-on work as part of your, I was thinking about people doing sort of self-massage or self-work, awareness work in that sense. Are you doing hands-on work as well at all, or?
Yeah, it's a little different now because of COVID, right? But when I work with people individually, there is definitely a hands-on component. They're fully clothed, sometimes they're on a table, sometimes they're on the floor, and they are active participants. And that's the other thing that makes the somatic work with the neuromuscular retraining, is that they are actively doing it, not all of it. Like sometimes they will be passive and I will move, say, a hip, leg bone, a thigh bone in the hip socket, right? And then I'll have them do it. And then we might use some resistance feedback where they'll do a movement and I'll resist it a little bit and then I'll let go of my resistance. So there's different ways of being tactile with them and using the touch to help them with this engage release process. And then sometimes the touch is simply for them to help bring their awareness to a place. And then other times I'll use touch because I'll have them do something and they'll think they're doing what I asked them, but they are actually doing something different, but they don't know they're doing something different. So then I can, with my touch, point out, actually, do you feel this happening? Okay, that's actually, side bending. We're actually trying to get you to arch. And so if they can be like, oh yeah, I was side bending. Oh, this is arch. And then they have a chance to understand better what some of their movement patterns, habituated ones are, and what we're trying to actually find. And another big one too is people in posture. And, so much of the time there's a stand, shoulders back, and this is what upright means, but that's actually way over exaggerated and they're tension filled and they're barely breathing. And when they relax out of that, they think they're slumping forward so much. And I've literally sometimes taken photos to be like, how does that look to you? They're like, oh, that looks great. I'm like, that's when you thought you were slouching forward, right? So everybody learns differently, right? Some are kinetic learners, some are visual learners, some are auditory. And in my group classes and in my individual sessions, I'm really trying to pinpoint how do they learn and present the information in a way that it lands. So it could look really different when I'm working with individual people, how a session goes. Like it's totally different. And then in the group classes, it's on a continual basis, providing different ways for them to take in the information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Your particular story of the arch back, the shoulder, the over exaggeration in the shoulders back being the good posture that's not really ideal. I have certainly seen and worked with that, and it tends to be women Not always, of course. And it tends to be, I tend to look at someone and usually they're like, well, I try to have good posture. And then they present this posture that's really, and I say, so your mother used to tell you, or someone in your life used to tell you to bring your shoulders back, huh? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, well, try to throw that out for a little bit and actually feel what's right in your body, because this is just cranking on your spine somewhere in there. I mean, it varies in the person. I'm like, and it's not actually, getting people to release into good posture versus it be this external, like formulaic idea of this is what perfect posture is, because that's the very nature of even describing that creates rigidity in my body, thinking about it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's where one thing that probably is a little different in how I teach is I really love the ability for people to have the experience, to be able to compare it to something else, and then to be able to verbalize what the heck it felt like and what's going on. Because I kind of feel like there's more learning that can happen when they're not just watching me and mimicking my movement. So a lot of times I'm talking and I'm not doing what I want them to do, because I don't want them to copy me. I want them to actually experience it and feel it. And then I can see what they're doing. And then I can be like, actually, this is what we're trying to do. Or yeah, just like that, and I think having the chance to have that feedback, I think it also helps people gain confidence in being able to notice what they're experiencing. And I think it also builds a sense of community. And I've always loved that in my classes, but I think especially now too, with we're in our little boxes and our screens, and not everyone's comfortable with talking in a class and asking questions, or I'll literally sometimes be like, okay, I have to walk around. What'd you notice? And just throw it out there. But I do think that there's a learning that happens from other people too, and if they can gain comfort talking a little bit about, and not that everybody has to talk. No, not everybody talks. I'm not saying they have to. It's just, I think it brings it into another layer of learning if you can experience it. And then if you can even just think to yourself about what that felt like, whether you just say it to yourself or you say it out loud, then it just lands, I think, in a different way.
So you are the first yoga teacher that I've had on the show, and it seems like you're not a conventional yoga teacher in a sense. And I'm going to sound like I'm insulting yoga more than I am at all intending in this, but it seems like the stereotypical yoga culture of, or in any case, the yoga culture of the sort of one body type as being the ideal for whatever that particular style of yoga is, and everyone's mimicking the teacher, trying to be them, and it's a very external thing, and you're comparing yourself to classmates, and I feel like in my practice see yoga injuries, not a super lot, but I definitely hear of yoga injuries a decent amount, where people are maybe trying to push themselves to do what the instructor is showing, or what the classmates are able to do. And it's this very external, and maybe they're not moving the right muscle, or even sometimes the right limb to try to get into whatever that position is. And it's sort of it's very prone to injury. And there's some problematic cultures. I know that there's some book that a yoga teacher is telling me called Poser, talking about some of the social problems of yoga. So could you speak to, I'm not trying to get you to badmouth sort of more mainstream yoga and such, but can you speak to sort of some of the problematic natures of yoga in the way it's sometimes taught, and what you might do differently in that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's true, everything you're saying. I think, how do I want to go about it? I think that the problem with seeing something and then doing whatever you can do to make your body fit into that does mean there's going to be stress and tension and breath holding and pulling and right for most people in different ways. So, and I do think that on a very regular basis doing something that isn't actually helping your body, either because it's functionally it's not appropriate for you, or you have an injury, or you don't know basic anatomy, or you don't have the ability to notice how it feels in you, that I do think it's a disservice, right? So, but there's this idea of yoga is good for us, so people will do it. But I think what is needed, and I do think there's a lot of yoga teachers that do a great job of this, is, and what I do in my classes is I model, and I will literally say out loud, doing this thing that I just had us do doesn't feel good in my right shoulder. So I'm going to do it this other way instead. And I'll give them 3 or 4 other options, or it might feel better like this, or it might feel better like this. And somebody might be really annoyed by all my options that I give, but I feel like what I'm doing is I'm giving people permission to pay attention to how does something actually feel. Here's some other options. Which one feels better? Maybe I do it this way a few times, and then that area has opened up a little bit more. Maybe I can extend my arm fully now. Maybe that feels better. No, I want to keep my hands at my hips. So I try to model other options, because I found that if I just say it and I don't sometimes show the other options, people will not try the other options. And what I always do is I break the movements down, and if you were to take my class, it doesn't even really look like yoga. Like, it's not like it, right? So even the therapeutic yoga classes I do, honestly, it's all shifted more towards somatics. So, but I'll every once in a while bring in something that might look like a yoga posture, but we get at it through functional movement. So if we need to do something where our arms are coming up over our heads, I'll first work at how does the arm bone rotate? How does the shoulder blade move? We'll wake that area up, and then we'll bring a bigger movement in. Same thing with how the leg bones move in the hip socket, or rotation. So we go in this incremental process, basically, to get there. And yeah, really fostering that people do what feels best in their body. And I will also, at the beginning of classes, ask, hey, what body part are you interested in exploring today? What's going on for you that you might want to focus on? And what that does is that helps me. And this is where the improvisation piece comes in, is I don't spend an hour before my classes prepping a class. I see who comes, and I see how they show up, and what they are sharing is their focus. And then we begin moving, and I incorporate it all in, and I weave it all together. And that's my comfort zone, right? I think because I have that background and feel comfortable with this idea of improvising based on what is showing up and who's showing up. Yeah, does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah,
thank you. So I was wondering if, to sort of wrap things up, if you had any closing advice. I know distilling the sort of more dynamic somatic experience that you're describing into concrete advice might be difficult, that applies to everyone. But do you have any closing advice?
Well, I think the advice would be the importance of listening in and tuning in. And that's really hard to do when so much else is happening, right? Whether it's the phone, the screen, the to-do lists, the trying to get stuff done while kids are at home, or, whatever it is. So it's like, I think there's lifestyle shifts and changes that are in order for people to be able to build awareness of their own bodies. And it's a lot to ask. So I encourage people to think about it as like small ways that they can have these, I kind of call them like tune in moments, right? Where they can just step away from the screen, or step even away from an interaction that's not working well, or that isn't getting anywhere, and just take a couple breaths. This idea of like stand and feel your feet, just like feel your feet connected to the ground, right? Wiggle your toes inside your shoes. Do something where you give yourself a chance to for even 30 seconds, be in the moment here and now. And that might look that if accessing the body is hard for somebody, it might mean I'm going to just look around my space and I'm going to notice 2 or 3 things I see. And I'm just going to simply name them, right? Like I notice my favorite plant in the corner and I can look out and right now and see the snow falling, and anything that gives you that chance to just like, oh yeah, I'm right here. I guess that would be my most, in terms of if there's something, free that's with you all the time, is like you have that ability to pause and notice, whether it's your body or something around you. Yeah. And if you have the ability to, say, take a class or something, it would be committing to some sort of movement practice that feels good in your body, but also like feeds your soul, because I think that is super important. It doesn't have to be my kind of classes, just something where it's like, it feels good. It feels good. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So, of course, a somatic thing like Amy was talking about, it can be really hard to entirely grasp just via voice. And if you would like to check out Amy's Instagram, you can check out the show notes for some additional links of what these classes and movement stuff might look like. The opinions expressed during this interview are not necessarily shared by me or Resilience Occupational Therapy. Everyone has their own different sets of needs, and I like to showcase a variety of different perspectives. Also, don't take any of this as medical advice, prescriptive or diagnostic. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to the podcast via the podcatcher of your choice and get a new episode every week. You've been listening to Resilience Radio. Take care.